Cortante, founder of Powerful Management Leadership and Technology Center. Today I'm going to talk about leveraging artificial intelligence and technology in lobbying, navigating the future of advocacy. You want me to go on?
Svetlana, do you want to say a couple of words for us? Introduce yourself and what you'll be discussing today. Well,
Yes, sure. Guys, I've been coming to this forum, and thank you very much to the team organizing it, because it has been extremely interesting. But I'm coming to this event from a communications and public relations part, being also a journalist and a Bulgarian. And I've been following it, and the whole day I've been asking myself, what would be the key for government relations professionals and AI? And actually, AI is the one thing that's penetrating anyone's lives. And I believe that here on this forum, the good news is that there will be some work for us, some more work for us to do with regards to AI going forward, instead of being afraid of our jobs. So with that short introduction, my name is Svetlana Stavreva. I'm now a freelancer and researcher, and as you mentioned, I'm a former president of the International PR Association, board member of this same association, also a member of Forbes Communications Council, Bulgarian native, based in Vienna, and working in the field of PR and communications.
thank you very much. I appreciate that. So there are two, I was talking with Maggie before this, we got kicked off, and I thought there are two ways to look at using AI in what we have. One is a tool, a strong tool. And this upcoming election season is going to be the first time we really get to see how that is going to impact what we do and what we see and what we know. Of interest is what has happened with Google over the last few weeks, and what they've done or done to it, and what the ramifications of that are going to be. Second, beyond being a tool, it's going to be something that we either advocate for or against in some way, either on behalf of a client or something that a client wants us to take and address as an issue. So we've got two different approaches that we've got to take a look at this. For just a quick vote here in the room, how many have played around with the AI tools that are out there, whether it's ChatGPT? Okay. Has anybody used Copilot yet? Anybody found any problems with the answers that they have requested? Anybody? Good. I didn't see one other person. I can two people. I can tell you from a personal experience in putting in information to an AI that I've gotten some responses that were shocking. I did some experimentation before Google pulled it offline, just as an example. I asked for it to send me pictures of Jesus and his disciples. And based on some of the responses that we're getting back, I was expecting a whole plethora of things. But surprisingly, it came back correctly. I can't say that the same thing when I asked to do that for Buddha. That one was a little more surprising. So it's got a long way to go, but I want to ask our two panelists how they think it's going to be effective for us as the tool. Maggie, can you address that one real quick?
Yes, artificial intelligence is all the talk today. So across various sectors, artificial intelligence raises crucial questions about improving work processes and potentially replacing professionals. So can you imagine yourself AI application to read the entire 2,500 plus page National Defense Authorization Act and extract all the components of the bill relevant to each of your client in mere seconds with just a few clicks? On the other hand, there is sending a dozen of emails to congressional staffers along with a one click. Artificial intelligence is a form of intelligent computing. In effect, it relies on computer programs that can sense, reason, learn, act, and adapt much like humans do. It is intelligent because it emulates human cognition. It is artificial because it involves computational rather than biological information processing. I have here, everybody knows that on October 30th, 2023, President Biden signed an executive order regarding AI. The order outlines appropriate government use of AI. It also sets forth a modernization plan for the federal government's AI infrastructure. With this plan, the administration hopes to ensure that the government does not fall behind when it comes to AI technology. So the question is, how is AI used in lobbying? In lobbying, AI has many uses. This includes data analysis, predictive analytics, communications, stakeholder mapping, and policy issue tracking. These processes are AI driven but followed through with human oversight. The types of oversight can determine the level of accuracy and influence, and I would like to go through each by one. Data analysis. AI-powered data analysis helps users quickly and efficiently analyze vast amount of data. This includes legislative data, public opinion polls, and social media trends. These analyses provide information within minutes, allowing for fast and effective responses. We have predictive analytics, and it can predict future political and legislative trends based on historical data. Lobbyists can anticipate changes, identify potential allies and opponents, and adjust their strategies. I have communication tools here, which is AI-powered communication tools include chatbots and natural language processing, which is NLP tools. These tools can help lobbyists automate communication with constituent lawmakers and the public. These tools can assist in crafting persuasive messaging and responses. And last two, I will go stakeholder mapping and I'll do issue tracking, which is stakeholder mapping is when it comes to stakeholder mapping, AI assists with identifying and categorizing stakeholders. With these tools, lobbyists can tailor their approaches, including messages and communication. The last one is issue tracking. AI can continuously monitor legislation, regulations, and public sentiment related to specific issues. This enables lobbyists to stay informed and adjust their strategies as needed. As a little wrap up, it will save our time, and it doesn't really mean that AI will take our places.
Not gonna take our place. You're right. And she's mapped out or mentioned here the different types of tools and different type of things we can ask it to do. I'm gonna go over to Svetlana and see what she sees it from her perspective, and also if she's used one and could recommend what she's used and what it was done with. So, can you address that for us?
Okay, so I'll be quick. So two things. So there is no question anymore that AI is part of our lives, and it will penetrate even more whatever we do. So it can make us better. It can make us find cure to the cancer or solve the climate issues, or it can make the things actually worse. And let me give you some numbers in this context. IDC International Data Corporations forecasts that enterprise spending on Gen AI solutions could reach 143 billion by 2027. And this is almost 10 times more compared to 2023, when the spending was 16 billion. So imagine how the speed in which AI tools, solutions, whatever you name it, are penetrating our lives even at that moment. Another astonishing number that I have, and this is from PricewaterhouseCoopers, is that AI could contribute towards GDP, towards world global economy, until something in the range of $15 trillion by 2030. So there is no way to run away. And we can talk a lot about what AI can do. And if I can just mention briefly what my previous speaker said about mapping, there are already tools that use social listening and media mapping and messaging mapping in order to establish relationships between, for example, influencers and the media that's more positive towards them, the media that's more likely to use their messaging. So out there are tools that can relate people to media, to certain views, to certain parties. And this is already part of our lives today. So it's extremely powerful. And as you said, that as you mentioned, the executive order of President Biden that he issued on October 30th, yesterday the European Union adopted an Artificial Intelligence Act, which is more aimed not at what AI can do, but it's aimed more at protecting citizens' right from those who could use AI to do harm or to do some bad. And actually, this is the main thing about AI. It's not about what it can do, because it can do anything, to be honest. It's how we are going to develop, how we are going to use it, how we are going to develop it going forward, and how should we address it, because it's up to us, and especially it's up to communications professionals, journalists, government relations professionals to set up standards and to raise the flags to the other people and ensure that the way how AI is going to be developed is going to be ethical, and it's not going to add to the divide in the humanities. And actually, the International PR Association in last November adopted, and I think we were among one of the first to adopt AI guidelines, exactly as trying to establish exactly that foundation of the further use of AI tools. And to me, this is the major problem going forward.
I see that the money I gave you for setting up that segue was well spent. That was outstanding. Moving us on to the part of the topic, which is moving away from just being a tool, but being a topic that we either advocate for or work with, finding solutions to what should be the limitations, if any, on AI. Looking at it from that perspective, how do you think we should take the stance, or how should we approach our clients when they have questions on what they should do with AI?
That's a very good question. I would like to share with you with the technologies, AI technologies, and share the example of the countries, how they are using that. So, for example, TEGI, we have example of Italy. Italy's parliament uses AI to organize legislative amendments by clustering similar texts. We have summarizing, which is in Iceland. Citizens can offer suggestions about urban problems on the Better Reykjavik website, which incorporates an AI tool to summarize submissions for policymakers, classify ideas, and flag abusive context. We have translating, which is here Silvana mentioned about EU. So translating for legislator requires to work in multiple languages. NLP assisted translation can speed up processes. And in June 2023, the European Union announced a new system to facilitate immediate access to machine translated commission in all 24 languages. And I have the last one, which is transcribing, which Estonia's parliament uses voice recognition to help transcribe committee proceeding and legislative sessions, and advising on internal rules and procedures. South Africa is developing a specialized non-generative AI chatbot for accessing parliamentary information. So those are technologies, different governments, different countries, they already started using that. And
Well, let's take a look at another aspect of that on the legislative side. These 1,000-page bills that we see being mentioned and worked on in the Hill, as they come up for a vote or they come up for a signature within each of the chambers here in the U.S. Imagine sticking an AI engine on that and what that means for the lobby, what we can ask of it to look for, and how quickly it can go through that. Some of those aspects of whether we've had stuff inserted or whether we are looking for stuff that has been inserted, that's going to have a completely different outcome because we don't have to spend the days and the hours till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning paging through it when we can pull it up within minutes every time, as long as it's published online. So that's something that is going to affect and shape how we are going to react with our clients or with the people that we work with on the Hill or other places going forward. Now, I know that many of you probably haven't had a chance to work some of the more analytical sides of this. Maybe you've got some teams back in your firms that have that kind of experience. That is something that's just being touched on as we look at cloud basing how things look, being able to intersect and figure out who has what relation with whom and where and when. This is something that can be generated again in just minutes that can show us very, very succinctly how one topic or one person can be interrelated with another. This is probably one of the most powerful tools that I have seen when I was with the agency that we were working with, is how do those topics, how do those people and how do those ideas intersect, and who is influencing those intersections, who may be influencing. Svetlana, what do you see coming from the other perspectives? How are they going to be using it?
Actually, this is exactly what I meant earlier when I said that through the mapping, you can find very easily relations that are not very obvious. But the key thing here is that the data that is being used, because if you use data that's not accurate or that's biased, then all the outcomes that AI is going to generate are going to be equally biased or inaccurate. And that's the whole danger out of it, because AI can as you said, it can be quicker, it can multiply results in no time. And when it does this on a wrong data, then this has the potential to create disinformation and a lot of many bad things actually that I don't even want to think about. So that's why it is extremely important for us to get the things right from the very beginning and make sure that whatever we do, especially in public domain, is clear, transparent, and based on accurate data.
I'll put this out there. We'll be able to get back on timeline here. I really want to thank you two for participating in the panel today. And I'll leave you with these thoughts and this comment. When people are talking about the bias of AI, it's not necessarily in the response that you're getting back where that influence is. What they've shown in investigating what Google ran into with their alleged bias was in how the response or the inquiry or the query was input. So it came from the front end rather than the back end. It turned your simple question, show me some settlers from 1865. The query would be turned into show me settlers of different types and different races from 1865. Those two queries, even though that's not the one you put in, is what comes back. And that gives a very distinct difference. So when we look at this and what we look for responses and what our capabilities are going to be, that's what we got to watch for. Any final words from anybody before we move on to the next panel?
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I would like to thank you, Katerina, for having me here. And final word can be that we can spread the word about AI.gov, which is about federal programs and policies, so people can check that out and follow. And one more word is that we have to train the staff, we have to teach them how to use AI, and that's really great to use as a good technology in the work.
Wise words of wisdom. Svetlana, anything parting from you, please?
Yeah, AI will be as good as we are, and the only difference between AI and the human intelligence is the possibility for the skill, the empathy, and the possibility to look through at the world through someone else's eyes. So this is something that cannot be automated at that stage. And this is our hope that we will take the lead and make all AI tools to be used for good.
Thank you very much, both of you. And thank you for everybody for tuning in. And see you here about 5 minutes for, I believe, our last panel for the afternoon. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Thank you, John, for moderation. I know that you speaker in the last panel. So we today have marathon. It's like 10 panels. It's first in our history when we have 10 panels. But we moving with Peter Pusey, the senior fellow of Hansen Institute, one of the key analytical centers in the United States. So he work on nuclear issues and modernizations, arm control, defense policy as well, and also he have a lot of programs on missile defense, space, non-space, and also particularly he uses public diplomacy to further United States policy. He will participate in our forum as a moderator, and thank you because Peter, one of the most influential person here in Washington DC, so he knows a lot of insights. And also other panelists is Mr. Terry Campo. He's principal of Washington DC Law Office of Terry T. Campo, LLC, and the Springfield, Illinois-based public affairs consultant firm. So it's national law practice company, and he concentrates in the field of political law, where he represents lobbyists and near the National Campaign Committee of the Republican Party, as well as individual candidates. We have pretty Republican path. He is the director of Illinois Group, an association of lobbyists for major industries in Illinois, and trustee of National Right to Work Legal Defense Fund. I don't think Kendall Coffey, our board member originally, but I will check now because he was joined online. And John Watt, you already know him. He's former head of American Media Corporation, Miami-based national media network focused on Hispanic audience, and also they work on Spanish. Also he was appointed as Associate Commissioner for U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and having appointed by White House to head all public communication strategy for this agency. We have two more speakers to this panel. So it's Nadia Shaporinskaya. So Nadia Shaporinskaya, head of organization which called US-Ukraine activists, and she received Order of Merit from Vladimir Zelensky not far time ago. They provide critical support for Ukrainian social, for Ukrainian soldiers in now war Russia against Ukraine. They have huge number of good projects for Ukraine. So if somebody can help to bring Nadia to panel, will be perfect. And Anastasia Magonova is the CEO and owner of international PR agency Magonova and Partners, which is recognized almost most reputable influential communication agency, which design, communicates, support most prominent government frameworks. You're owner of Kasat Media, a media platform that covers energy issues. So she also with us in person. And yeah, thank you for your resistance. It will be one of the most interesting panel on my point of view, and we see some democratic point of view on our forum, and we used to invite people who work with Democratic and Republican parties to bring our forum pretty non-partisan. So please take your seats, and Peter, floor is yours.
We ready? Okay. My name is Peter Husey, and I want to welcome you all here. I'm going to talk very briefly, introduce your panel, about what successful, what I call, what President Reagan called public diplomacy looks like. And today, one of the questions one of the panelists asked me is, why are we in such good luck in Congress? Well, two words: money and media. President Congressman from Washington State, Norm Dix, the Appropriations Defense Subcommittee, was a moderate Democrat, dear friend. And he told me, he said, Peter, to raise money in Washington, you have to have a dragon to slay, but never slay the dragon. Because if you slay the dragon, the money stops. And often the dragon is in parts higher, half a part, maybe something close to the truth. Remember when the Pentagon said, our biggest problem is white supremacy? Then they asked the Secretary of Defense at the hearing recently, how many white supremacists did you find? Zero. We're still looking. So in Washington, there are a lot of false narratives. One of our people is going to talk about his grassroots group that is our narratives that have a story that's good, but this thing is you want to solve it. You want to kill the dragon. When Reagan said there was an evil empire, he didn't just say, I'm going to leave it out there in order to raise money. He said, I'm going to kill it, which he did. An extraordinary achievement. Those of you interested is Warren Norquist, which is the dad of Grover Norquist, head of American Tax Reform. He wrote a piece in 2000 in the National Intelligencer, which is How Did Reagan Win the Cold War? And he actually has, it was an economic war against the Russians. And it's brilliantly done. He has tables with the amount of money. I'll give you an example. Russia's foreign exchange in 1980 was $32 billion. That's peanuts compared to today. Look at China. And at the end of Reagan's term, 1989, January, the cost of the Soviet empire was $89 billion. And their foreign exchange of $32 billion went down. Why? Because we increased oil production. The Saudis increased oil production 6 million barrels a day from 2 million to 8. At the request of President Reagan, it totally wiped out the Soviet exchequer, because 2/3 of the Soviet Union's money was from oil and gas sales, and the other was from arms deals. And they couldn't make it. And it was literally, as Mr. Norquist points out, Roger Robinson was the architect, along with Stan Bailey, of the economic war against the Russians, and it all came from President Reagan. So with media in Congress, we have, for example, white supremacy, we have gender dysphoria, we have climate change as opposed to global warming. All of, I think, are scams. That's me. But none of them, you never hear anybody in the global warming business. We brought down the 56 billion tons of carbon last year to X. I know the US went from 6 to 5 billion. Europe went from 6 to 5 billion. China's at 18 billion. India's at 4 billion tons per year. And yet they're both building coal-fired plants to the tune of one a month. That's not going to, in fact, it's going to wipe out the entire accomplishments of the Europeans and the United States and North America, including Canada. Every year, everything we do, even if we max out, is wiped out. So in my mind, there's narratives in Washington that are false, in which you never solve them. And that's the reason they have gridlock. Because Republicans take this position on global warming and the Democrats here, and they can't get off of that on the part of Democrats, because otherwise the money dries. And so what's interesting is, I used to think if you scared the hell out of people, they get concerned, donate money, join grassroots groups, and get on with it. Change my mind. Someone who engaged in public diplomacy for nuclear deterrence since 1981, when the Reagan administration hired me to do this. This is an ongoing effort that doesn't stop. And it takes an enormous amount of work, because the media tends to go to the disarmament groups when they talk to anybody about nuclear weapons. Remember, the nuclear freeze was big when Reagan came in. He had to defeat that. He had to defeat the bishops. He had to stop the Russians from building SS-20s all over Europe and, by the way, Asia, which isn't talked about. And it was a remarkable achievement. We went from 12,000 nuclear weapons on the part of the Russians to now 1,500. Now, that doesn't include theater weapons, which are anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000. So you have to, there's a caveat, there's a big footnote to that, but that's an extraordinary achievement. And unfortunately, it's not getting worse. As Bill Gates wrote in Foreign Affairs just this week, we're going to face Iran, probably nuclear armed, North Korea nuclear armed, China building in a breathtaking way, according to the commander of Strategic Command, and Russia. When you add it all up, my friend Christopher Yu at the University of Nebraska says they'll collectively have 10,000 nuclear warheads by 2035. And we have currently 1,500 to 1,800, depending on how you want to count bomber weapons. So my view is, let me leave you with this thought. A narrative has to be true to be effective in Washington, D.C., or let me put it this, to be morally effective. There are a lot of fairy tales out in Washington, and then global warming being one of them, in my view. But if it's a narrative, what we used to call an elevator briefing in Congress, that means you grab the senator when he comes off the floor of the Senate, you get in the elevator, go down one floor to the subway, and if you can't tell the senator what he needs to know in 18 seconds, he won't get it, because he's going to talk to the media, he's got to talk to his colleagues, he's got to talk to constituents, and he has to, and that's what an elevator briefing is. Now, an elevator briefing is not what my friend Uzi Rubin of Israel calls a fortune cookie analysis. It's actually real, like peace through strength. Reagan backed that up with an enormous amount of, but it was very true, peace through strength. And if a narrative works, you can't scare the hell out of people, because you have to tell them there's a solution. Because otherwise you paralyze people if you're scared them too much. And if you paralyze people, they say, I'm going to go have a barbecue if I'm going to die in 10 weeks. And it's over, heck with it. I'm going to go have a steak. Okay. So if something works and is a good narrative, and number two, a good narrative is irrespective, money isn't the deal. Because the deep state in this town, and I know it from personal experience, I have killed programs that are multi-hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and they're very clever in this town. They just found another organization to put the same amount of money in and change the name. They just so happen to put it in the district of the chairman of the subcommittee on foreign operations and the appropriations committee in the House. That's Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. They haven't at least stolen the money like George Washington did for years, which is why we put them out of business. But this town is very clever. And lobbying, part of it is your narrative has to be right. It should be, in my view, moral. It should have nothing to do with money. And you're identifying a way of slaying it. Then I think you're serious. So with that, I'll turn it over to my panelists here on the left.
All right. I'm going to continue a little bit the theme of what Peter was talking about, because Congress today is a lot like World War I trench warfare. Lots of blood is shed for inches of ground every day that is lost following day. We are essentially in a situation in which The Republican Party now has 218 congressmen. That is a majority of the full House by one vote. There are 5 vacancies now. Those vacancies could wind up flipping control of the House of Representatives before the election in November. But in that election in November, whoever wins the White House, whichever party wins the White House, is likely to tip enough votes in a few states to also control the Senate. Now, I personally believe that I'm a Republican, but Republicans are going to lose the House in the next election. They gained it the last time, primarily because of redistricting in New York. We picked up 4 Republican seats. New York is being redistricted again. We're going to lose those 4 seats. There's a redistricting in North Carolina, court order redistricting. We'll probably lose 1, possibly 2 seats there. But more importantly as you saw with Ken Buck the other day, these guys, our top guys, are sick and tired of that trench warfare and are quitting. And when there's a retirement and an open seat, chances are very strong that they'll switch parties. Moreover, there's only 46 competitive House seats in terms of which one party can win or the other. The battle nowadays is the primary in the rest of the country. Those 46 seats are in the suburbs. Suburbs is where Donald Trump tanks. And so I think we will lose a lot of those suburban congressional seats that would have, with another nominee, could be won by the Republican Party. And the reason I get into that election math is that's going to affect lobbying environment here in Washington for the next 2, 4, and 6 years. Because the other aspect is that the Congress that is elected this year is going to face the bankruptcy of the Federal Highway Trust Fund as one of the issues they're going to have to deal with. Watch for a tire tax or something, because now that everybody is driving hybrids and electric vehicles, they're not buying gasoline, and therefore they're not contributing to the maintenance of the highways. More importantly, most of us have discovered, thanks to COVID, that we can work from home. I go to the office once a week now, mainly to pick up the mail and supervise people who are slightly junior than I am. And that's it. I'm saving a ton of money on gasoline, but more importantly, I'm not buying that. I'm going from once a week filling up my tank to once a month. And therefore, the 18.5% federal tax is not being paid has been cut basically by people like me by 3/4. That will exhaust, dealing with that fiscal crisis will exhaust the next Congress. And they'll be really wanting to get out then, because what happens next is the impending bankruptcy of Medicare and Social Security. These are on the verge of insolvency. Medicare's hospital fund, I think, is 2028, which is fiscal year. It becomes insolvent. Social Security's old age pension fund is 2033. So we're talking about cascading fiscal crises that's going to dominate the Congress for the next few years. And so anything you want to get done in Congress needs to find a way to piggyback onto those bailouts of these systems. And with that, I'll let you.
You know what, I'm going to not take the mic up yet. Mr. Coffey, Kendall Coffey, who is online here. Let's move to somebody that's online. Sir, would you like to take up the mic at this point?
Happy to talk a little bit. I'm a Democrat, so it confirms the balance of this. Although I would probably be echoing a lot of the comments of my Republican colleagues, because all of us see kind of a startling situation in the United States. Of course, I'm a baby boomer, so I remember, senators and congressmen in the 60s and the 70s talking to each other. But now there are a couple different sources of this. The the hostility between opposing camps not just creates gridlock, but I think it, at least for the public standpoint, it makes it very difficult to engage on issues and to change your mind about anything. I have trouble thinking of a time when, people admitted, we were wrong about that, or conversely, we were persuaded by the other side. I have to say that when you have not only a paralysis in terms of the alignments of government, but in terms of just thinking about things, that's a pretty troubling indication. I remember being involved in litigation, which was successful up to a point, against the Florida state executive, including Governor DeSantis. And we were very, very concerned about the risk of COVID in opening public schools. And that was our position. And I thought it would be a health disaster for kids. And I was very, very motivated. Guess what? We were wrong. The governor insisted that the public schools be open. He ultimately prevailed in the appeals courts. And you know what? By and large, kids were all right. And I think they did better in a classroom, especially, as you can imagine, kids who had some kind of disadvantage to begin with. But at least, what struck me about it is you could see, gosh, he was right after all. But there's just not an acknowledgement. People just go silent. And so you don't have a give and take on issues very much. So that is one perspective that deeply, deeply concerns me. I'd be very surprised if during the course of this presidential election or congressional, that anybody's really listening to the other side, other than to say how bad they are and how important it is that you reach into your pockets to fund somebody to cast out, as Peter said, slay the dragons, because it's hard to find other things that motivate it. I want to talk and how much of this is money, just for our guests and our visitors to get some idea of the raw numbers. In the 2022 cycle, in federal elections, this is what's reported: $8.9 billion was spent. That's a shocking amount of money. If you include state, local, and federal, it's about $17 billion, and it's going up. It's just skyrocketing all around us. And most of that advertising is not spent on trying to persuade somebody about issues. It's trying to persuade them that the other is a bad guy. With respect to lobbyists and the role in elections, I think, and that's one of the issues that's posed. What is their role in the elections? Well, it's probably to have a colleague that's on the other side. A lot of the successful lobbying firms, of course, have Democrats and Republicans, because you can get caught short. Take a state like Florida that used to be somewhat blue, somewhat red. It's overwhelmingly red now. So there's not much room in certain parts of the lobbying world to really advocate for anything but a Republican agenda. And that's because they won and we keep losing. It's just the system that we're in. But it has an impact on lobbyists. At the local level, lobbyists tend to become fundraisers. They have to be. If a lobbyist wants to walk into City Hall or County Hall, there's a silent head count done on how much they've given in terms of some of the reactions they'll get from locals. At the federal level, you of course have rules and regulations that most of us are familiar with, but at the end of the day, money still talks about more loudly than anything. One thing that I know this conference is trying to do is elevate internationally the ethics and the honor of lobbyists. And of course, reputationally, lobbyists are still reputationally challenged to some extent. And I just wanted to mention we're in a significant litigation right now in the Federal Appeals Court in Atlanta, and it's going to be interesting to me to see how it turns out with respect to lobbyists. The issue is really what First Amendment rights do lobbyists have, and it's generally been the law that lobbyists, what they do is a First Amendment, that is to say, constitutionally protected activity, respected by our Constitution, because they're advocating for viewpoints. They're advocating for legislators or other government officials on behalf of a client. And that's the essence of democracy, trying to persuade the decision makers. Nevertheless, our litigation, which was initially very, very successful, is now in the appeals court. And perhaps at the next conference, I'll have some kind of report on it. But my overall experience is so far that lobbyists are being challenged to establish that they have the full level of constitutional protection that others in the democratic process do. I spoke to some friends before today's conference, and kind of talked about, is more regulation needed? Is less regulation needed? And I think that the answer is different whether you're at a federal or state or local level. Just so you know, in a lot of local lobbying contexts, everybody's a lobbyist. So if you're an architect and you go down to speak to city staff about whether there's an issue about the plans that were submitted, you're a lobbyist and you got to register, and they don't make it easy. I'm talking about a lot of local jurisdictions. The federal rules are a bit better and a bit more consistently applied, but I would just suggest that there is perhaps a possibility that to some extent, believe it or not, lobbyists can be overly regulated. And no one's going to get sympathy for lobbyists, and I'm certainly not trying to accomplish that here. But I just want to close with the thought that it's fundamental to our system of government that people not only be able to communicate directly, but have champions or advocates who speak for them. And I think the ethics in lobbying is a big part of that. But to the extent that fundraising is so dominating American life, and fundraising driven by hostility, that the other side is a bad guy, I think that the challenges are considerable. I make no predictions about the presidential election, by the way. Every time I've made a prediction about Donald Trump, I've been completely wrong. So I'm going to stay silent on the subject. Perhaps other panelists will venture a guess on how 2024 is going to turn out.
Let me interject and say, Democratic colleague, I agree with 100% of what you said.
Well, thanks for noting that.
Partisanship works.
It worked pretty well for most of our history.
Absolutely.
Yes, so thank you. In this battle between Democrats and Republicans, there is the Ukraine. Surprisingly. And the Ukrainian question is one of the key issues on the eve of the US election. Rhetoric about military assistance to Ukraine or participation in its reconstruction or battlefield context serve as a scale that and differentiates their electorate, in English, in the United States. That is why Ukraine constantly tries to give updates on the situation, political situation in Ukraine and battle situation, and to tell what is going on. However, the way Ukraine advocates for itself and its interests in the US is not always easy for the American stakeholders to comprehend due to different culture of lobbying or advocacy. Moreover, the Ukrainian question is being excessively speculated upon from different sides. That's why I'd like to share some practical pieces of advice in case you have to deal with Ukrainian stakeholders and understand the political situation or lobby context better. So what I want to do is, to share the peculiarities in Ukrainian lobbying culture, in Ukrainian lobbying culture. So when then Ukrainian lobbyists approach you, you will not be overly surprised. In the second part, I will try to explain the key context of Ukrainian political scene. So every time when you watch the news, you will have deeper understanding of what is going on. So Ukraine is a country with own political culture differences. Firstly, in Ukraine, people prefer to trust personalities, not concepts. This is why we have our political parties are parties of faces. We have the party of Poroshenko or Zelensky and so on, and we don't have parties, like with ideas like you have in the United States, the Democrats or the Republicans. My Ukrainian colleagues might use the principle of personalities, not concepts, to build communication with the US stakeholders. Your task is to understand what concept, ideology, or solution is behind this personality, this famous person of Ukraine. And second point is that advocacy and lobbies in Ukraine is just beginning to emerge. I mean, Ukraine just not so long ago adopted a draft law about lobbying. That regulates lobbying in the country. It was just half an hour ago. You have this act, I don't know, like 10 years, 50 years, or just 6 months ago. What does this mean? In the coming months, you will witness how many advocacy and lobbying professionals in Ukraine will try to get in touch with you. Yet, do not expect systematic approach and processes from everybody. If you have the opportunity, propose your process of communication, since your understanding of advocacy is much more established. Unfortunately, those who advocate for Ukraine and those who advocate against Ukraine, I mean against democratic values, often use the same emotional charged approach. For instance, sometimes the media propagate the idea that Ukraine cannot use aid properly. And some of opinion leaders in Twitter in America, they are eager to spread this information. And, no matter how emotionally engaging this thesis may be, it lacks substance, as demonstrated by regular audits conducted by American officials. In the coming months, you will encounter many such stories, and the first question you should ask, where is the data coming from? Always follow the data when you deal with Ukraine. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nadia Shabalinska, the president of the non-profit charitable organization, US Ukrainian Activist. I was supposed to participate in the panel advocacy, and I'm going to tell you about some advocacy efforts of our non-profit organization. Our mission is to support Ukraine, its culture, and its people in their fight for independence and democracy. We're dedicated to helping stabilize and providing financial assistance to those in need to defend, survive, recover, and other necessary support. In addition, focus on raising awareness and advocating for Ukraine, as well as promoting its rich cultural heritage and legacy. US Ukrainian Activist is deeply committed to raising awareness and advocating for Ukraine. Our advocacy for Ukraine is among our prime programs, alongside initiatives such as military aid, hospitals in Ukraine, and humanitarian aid. To learn more about these programs, you can visit our social media and the website. In March 2014, when the Russian Federation initiated a hybrid war in Donbass, eastern Ukraine, our key volunteers have been at the front advocating Ukraine and providing vital humanitarian aid from the US. Since 2014, I actively organized and co-organized rallies, protests, and marches in Washington, D.C. in support of Ukraine by the White House, Lincoln Memorial, the Russian Embassy, and the residence of the Russian ambassador. After Russia launched a full-scale genocidal war against Ukraine on February the 24th, 2022, I started the organization of daily White House rallies. This involved creating Facebook events, sharing them across various media platforms, obtaining permits from the National Park Service for our daily rallies, which are named with Ukraine every day, and updating the rallies program with main messages and slogans. These rallies continued for 1 year and a half before transitioning to weekly rallies near the White House. A few more details about our White House rallies. Over the past 2 years, on a weekly basis, I've been creating Facebook events for our USUA rallies, which later transitioned into weekly rallies by the White House. I have consistently updated our advocacy program with key messages and slogans, responding to the evolving situation. I would like to share a few examples of how our messages evolved during the initial months of the invasion. From the onset of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, our advocacy began with requests for fighter jets, tanks for Ukraine. Subsequently, we included the message, send Patriot systems to Ukraine. In May 2022, we further expanded our advocacy by adding the message, HIMARS for Ukraine. Another example, when the embargo on oil was implemented on March 8, 2022, we discontinued the message, embargo on Russian oil. Around April 2022, we incorporated the message, lend the lease for Ukraine, to our rally at the White House. However, using this message after the Lend-Lease was signed on May 9, 2022. Additionally, since the beginning of the summer of 2022, we have been advocating for MLRS, Multiple Launch Rocket Systems. These are just examples of how our messages were changed and evolved during our daily rallies by the White House. In recent months, our nonprofit organization, US Ukraine Activists, has been actively advocating for the pacing of supplemental funding for Ukraine, urging supporters to contact their representatives and senators. For example, we initiated an advocacy campaign on our website and various social platforms, providing guidance on how to effectively reach out to the members of Congress to advocate for the supplemental funding for Ukraine. We've included the following message for constituents to use when contacting their representatives. Ukraine is currently fighting for peace and democracy in the entire free world, sacrificing Ukrainian lives. If Russia is not stopped, it will continue further and potentially invade neighboring European countries. Ukrainians are courageously defending fundamental values such as freedom, liberty, and democracy, principles deeply cherished by all Americans. In this shared pursuit, both Americans and Ukrainians stand united. Please urge your representatives and senators to continue providing necessary military assistance to Ukraine, so Ukraine can win this war sooner and with fewer casualties among innocent civilians, children, women, and men. We have this message on our website, along with the instruction how to reach the congressman. Additionally, we are now encouraging everyone to reach out to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, to pursue him to introduce Ukraine Aid Bill, to the House to pass the supplemental funding for Ukraine. We are we invite all the foreign participants and all the friends of Ukraine to participate in our rallies and projects. You can find more information on the social media of US Ukrainian activists and on our website, US Ukrainian Activists. This weekend, we will have two events, one event by the Russian embassy at 12 noon and one by the White House from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Thank you. And we are very thankful to International Government Affairs Professionals Association and to Katerina Darchenko for organizing this important forum in support regarding governmental relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'm going to tie this around, if you don't mind. We just saw a very good example of effective lobbying, but I think we go back to the question we were discussing here with why are we in this rut? Why are we facing this where we're at today, this deep divide, this one side or the other, the top, bottom, whatever it is? I'll tell you why. It's my fault. And I can say that with sincerity. It is my fault in this electronic age. And I'll tell you why. I'm the young pup here, even though I'm the young at this job at doing this kind of influencing or information or whatever. My first experience with the first was 2003, countering the propaganda of AQAP and AQ and IZ in Iraq, sitting in the headquarters as we begin to cross the berm from Kuwait into Iraq, and then as Marine the soldier. That was my job was to take the phone when it rang, find out what those soldiers had just done, turn that into a press release or an information release that we could give that hopefully made the phones light up, wondering what the soldiers had done, and they were checking on their buddies, on those bad guys that were out there in the field. I spent every day of the next 3 years, between 2003 and 2005, trying to find ways to counter their efforts, to counter our messaging on what was going on. We even had to oppose places like the Lancet, that was trying at that time to influence the 2004 election, missing information that was out there. That was my specific job, was to find out from the different headquarters what is the actual truth out there. What is it that we can put out that tells the American people what is actually going on? Back then, we didn't have the Facebooks. We didn't have the X or the Twitters or anything like that. In the early days, very, very early Facebook time before it spread out, very, very early MySpace, anybody remembers that, we had blogs. When I left there, I had the #1 military information blog on the internet, which at the time was black5.net. Our job was to inform the people what was actually going on out there. What was fun about it is we had an unhindered way of giving out information, influence opinion, try and describe, maybe in a funny, maybe not so funny way, what was actually happening. Those blogs, whether it was ours, or any of the others that were out there, and the responses, the ability to make comments, the keyboard warrior was born. Everybody had members of days back in the 70s and 80s when CompuServe and all that, but those were all people of like minds. These blogs and later the social media things that we have today, those are the progenitors of the keyboard warriors that could come up, make the comments, not have to worry about defending it, no matter how ridiculous, how unfactual, or factual even for that matter, they became. This, over the years, has driven where we are today, because it's further divided us, because If you look at some of the problems that they've had, comic book industry, they can't defend the artists. The artists are out of control, trying to show how LGBTQ they can be, whether it's Superman, Batman, Flash, anything. That really wars up the culture wars that we became. Then it moved into the electronic gaming industry. Now it's the realm. Nobody can defend it. Nobody can describe it because blog let anybody and everybody comment and not call them, not try and scramble them or block them, all in the name of speech. So looking at where we're going this election cycle with AI driving that bus, this is what we have to look forward to. This is going to be probably the most difficult season we've faced. And I know we say that every 4 years. Somebody stands up, this is the worst. Or democracy is at stake. It is at stake. That's why we have elections. Every 4 years, our democracy is at stake. Just that sometimes it's worse than others. This one, maybe even more so. With that, I'm just going to leave you. Blame me if you like. I'll take it, and I'd love to discuss it with somebody.
Also for Scotty Malone's blacknet. And he passed away 2 years ago, but he was a reporter for PBS, or producer, who won a couple, I don't know, was it Emmys or was it, what was the statue he won? Anyway, he was intrepid. He was crazy, but wonderful. I want to answer my friends. I support the Ukraine. Here's why you have a problem with the American public. You have a morally sound argument. I can make it in an elevator briefing to a senator. No question. I said, why did Margaret Thatcher defend the Falklands or her country against the Argentinians? Why did we kick Saddam out of Kuwait? The funds had no basis for our security interests. Kuwait, you could argue because of the oil in the Persian Gulf, okay. But we had a more sound argument. We made it very well. We put together a coalition of something like 70 countries. Yeah. But my argument with people is Reagan did not take down the Soviet Empire for the United States to put it back together. That argument is, as my early friend, is not a fortune cookie analysis. It's a sound analysis based on history. Because if you let the Soviets do this or Russians do this, you will lose all deterrent value of our military. And when you lose deterrence, it's very, very difficult to get it back. We saw that after Vietnam. 18, and now you count 18 countries fell to the Soviet Union after the Vietnam War was over. 18, from Mozambique to Ethiopia to Nicaragua and Colombia and El Salvador and dozens of others were at risk. But here's the problem. One serious problem. After we signed the deal with Ukraine in 1994, we kind of went to sleep. We said, we'll get to it tomorrow. But we have no plan to win. That is why people talk about, oh God, another endless war. We spent 20 years in Afghanistan, 20 years in Iraq. They began with brilliant victories by our military, taking down Saddam's army and taking down the Taliban. When you had guys on horseback with laptops, communicating with B-52 bombers, doing close air support with joint directed air munitions, because the Mujahideen, the Northern Alliance, were giving us the locations of the bad guys, the Taliban, and you could hear the JDAMs coming down through the clouds. We couldn't see them, and the Northern Alliance called them God. And in a very short order, December of 2000, the war was over. Seriously, the Taliban had just decimated Al Qaeda hills, but I have a plan in the senator. But during the hearings in October about what are you going to do, Mr. Rumsfeld, about this, he was criticized for not planning to put more American boots on the ground because he said, the senator said, you're fighting a high-tech war and that's unfair. Fascinating to me that it was wrong to fight a war and get it over quickly without
And win it.
destroying the entire country. And that is your biggest problem. And the thing I didn't mention earlier was the media. This whole thing about misinformation and so forth is you don't need the media to protect you when your argument's right. When your argument is full of holes, whether the Russian hoax, whether the thing on COVID, Harvard professor, a doctor, said she will be fine, was banned from his NIH position, and he was just fired by Harvard University as a full professor. He got everything right. And the part of the polarization in America is, and it's on both sides to some degree, but media take for issues that they not correct. And they have to from scrutiny doesn't matter to if I'm right. You know, I've got the disarmament community for some odd years wanted to kill the MX missile, wanted to kill the D5 missile, wanted to kill the B2 bomber, which they succeeded in doing that for they built 20. And they wanted to kill the B1. There isn't a nuclear weapon system they didn't want to kill. They only killed the B2 because John Kasich, God love him, said, promised my constituents at the end of the Cold War, I'd kill a nuclear facility, nuclear program. And so he joined with Ron Dellums, the Democrat, to stop at 20. I remember standing in an elevator with Sam Nunn, and Carl Levin, who was trying to kill the B2, was in the elevator. I said, "Do you want?" He says, "Yeah, sure." He knows what we think. And I said, Nunn asked me, he said, "What happens if we come off 120 planes?" I said, "You'll go to the number of planes now being built, which is 20. Because if you can't sustain the argument you made all those years for 120, people are going to say, well, that was just baloney. You just made the number up. If you really believe 120, then that's what you stick with. Now, if you can't build them as soon as you want, you stretch it out. You don't like to do it, costs more money. But my concern with the media is they have taken total sides and they sustain arguments that cannot be, like COVID about children. We shut this country down, cost us trillions and trillions of dollars. The children are now, what, 2, 3, 4 years behind in educational attainment. We kept open the bars and we kept open the strip clubs and the casinos. We shut the churches. It made no rhyme or reason, and the governors did it. The president had no authority. What the president had the authority to do was keep everything open, farms and mining and everything critical to the country's survival. He could say, no, you can't be closed. I don't care what the governor said. That he had the power to do, and that sustained us. But my concern is the combination of media, and I didn't realize the amount of money. I knew it was in the billions, but remember when they had the presidential check off on your tax return? And we're going to give each president $60 million. That was it for the federal campaign. And now it's in the multi-billions because everybody pitches in. To me, in working Congress, which I do, that to me is the most dangerous combination, is the media that won't let debate happen and money that basically stifles any discussion because the other guy's the bad guy and you demonize him and you don't have a discussion of issues. And as someone who in the nuclear business have spent almost 5 years sustaining our nuclear deterrent, which, by the way, between 1997, we killed the B2. We will build a first nuclear weapon in the field in the year 2031. As General Herron said once, he said, we went on a holiday. We forgot about it. We said it wasn't important. And now we have to do everything simultaneously. Every part of the nuclear deterrent has to be rebuilt. You've got buildings that were part of the Manhattan Project that have not been rebuilt since. That's NNSA. And they do extraordinary, they do all the warhead work. So in my mind, they overcome the arms disarmament community, Global Zero, going to Plowshares people and so forth. But we had a moral argument that everybody understood. And we had an argument in which we had millions of dollars arrayed against us, not billions. And the media, even though they're totally uninformed, I got this from a former command admiral who's head of strategic command. He told me, he said, you got to understand they have no idea what they're talking about by and large. And that's because they didn't find it of interest. Okay. We argued in the 1990s with Colin Powell. We said Russia is unimportant because they're broke. And yeah, they got a lot of nuclear weapons, but as John McCain said, they're a gas station with a lot of nukes. Unimportant because their GDP is less than Texas. True in every respect, except for look at the trouble they're making. Okay, I called the Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. I call the brothers mayhem. And they're all, Cage talked about, they're all allied. That to me is the real danger. But unless we come up with a plan to, whatever the plan is, keep Russia where it was, kick them out. But if you're not willing to take the war to Russia and win this thing, you got a lot of Americans, polls show the majority of Americans don't support aid to Ukraine, although American soldiers aren't fighting. We're giving them assistance, we're helping them with surveillance and things. But to me, all the work Reagan did and every president from Truman on to defeat the Soviet Union and bring it down, to then turn around and America will lead the effort to basically allow Russia to begin restoring its empire, which is what Putin wants to do. What a tragedy. And in just 30 years after the end of the Soviet Empire, we're now in the business of, and look, we screwed up when they invaded Ukraine the first time. We gave them blankets. Okay, to me, I don't want to get partisan on this, but we made some real mistakes, and now we're trying to recoup at a time when one thing I remember President Reagan once said, you can never get time you wasted back. When you don't make decisions and you screw around and you wait and kick the can down the road, eventually you run out of road to kick the can down. And that's what we did with this. And Putin knew that. So in my view is, I think eventually you'll get assistance, but the tragedy is in the absence of it, Ukraine is kind of stalled. And Russia doesn't have this problem. Putin doesn't have to go to the Duma for these weapons. So with that, I think, I don't know how to get the money out of politics. And I don't know how to get the media to be at least somewhat balanced. Because I think without either one, as the gentleman said earlier, we are facing 3 or 4 major financial catastrophes simultaneously on top of the 33 trillion in debt we now have, which is projected by OMB to go up another 22 trillion in the next decade, on top of which is now costing us about $887 billion a year interest on the debt. And add in Medicare, add in Medicaid, and add in the final thing I want to say is, what's fascinating me is not discussed in the media. AEI came out with a number the other day. What % of American men of working age are working now in America? 63%. That's down from 86%. Okay, how do you get enough revenue and jobs? And one of the congressmen, Texas, told me that the reason everybody in Texas tells you a high school graduation, young man, what's the #1 job? I'm in a truck. Why can't they get a license to drive a commercial truck? Because the system comes back when they drug test it, it's full of marijuana, and we're making marijuana legal. So we're basically destroying the ability of young men because they can't get insurance if they have drugs in their system. Companies can't get insurance, and yet that's the #1 job for men with just a high school education is to drive a truck.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was glad.
Kendall, anything final before we close up your show, sir?
No. I mean, I'm a little bit depressed because everything I've heard is completely valid. I'm of course an optimist, but I have to admit I don't exactly see what historic forces are coming into play. They're going to change some of the concerns we have. So rather than add to my own gloom, I'll thank everybody for the chance to participate, and it's a great important conference, and I've just loved sharing this time with these distinguished colleagues.
Thank you, sir, very much. Good luck to you. Okay. So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Evan, thank you very much.
I couldn't help it. This is.
Thank you so much. So we got 10 panels, and all our 10 panels, which was about different issues, will be on GitHub.net. Thank you for team of T Group, of team of Institute for Democracy and Development, GitHub, to our media partners, ALLATRA TV. Also thanks so much to Atlantic University and their colleagues for hosting us here and for helping with moderation. And thank you to all moderators and our speakers, members of EGAPA, and our team in was 15, today 16 countries. So we are moving forward, and now we start moving also to Latin America, which I think pretty good result, like 9 years, 16 countries, not bad, right? So we're moving much more quicker than NATO. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your resistance. We do like 10 panels, it's great. Have a good night if you're in Europe, have a good morning if you're in Central Asia, and have a good evening if you're here in Washington, D.C. My name is Katerina Odavchenko. Please follow up in the GAP. And today, all event was charged, so you can find also our Stripe donation link if you can and want to help to our work. We will really appreciate that. And it's 501c3 here in the United States, so it will be good. Thank you so much and have a great evening. Bye bye.
We didn't really meet, but I know we've met before. Terry Campo, we were in the Reagan administration, weren't you? Okay, so
No, I was in uniform and
43.
so
I, yeah,